This week, another battery breakthrough in China. This time you can charge an EV in, let's see, I'm sorry, it's already charged 2 minutes ago.
Wow. The Chicago Teachers Union has included climate in their latest contract negotiations. The proposals demand paid climate educator positions and an all-electric school bus fleet. They also want to turn all teachers' lounges into discotheques, but you can't have everything.
New York Times columnist Thomas L. Friedman just got back from China, and he says we're screwed in a profanity-laced podcast. And since we have a clip from that podcast, we're now a profanity-laced podcast. Seriously, kids, maybe set this one out.
A housing co-op in New York City has gone all-electric far ahead of state deadlines. Too bad it's the building from Only Murders in the Building, and multiple murders are pending.
All that and more in this edition of the Clean Energy Show.
The Pope passed away this week, Pope Francis.
I want to call him a friend of the show, but he's a real person, and we can't make fun of that, but yeah.
He's not technically a friend of the show, but we like to think of him. I mean, it's really surprising how often we talked about the Pope on this show.
I blame you. I think this is all on you. I don't remember bringing the Pope up myself. Of course, the Pope, we'll talk about this at the end of the show, but he did actually make some efforts in climate and, EVs and things like that, which is something that I respect.
The Chicago teachers have approved 97% of the members this month. They have this agreement that they've bargained for, and they've added all these climate change provisions in this teacher's contract in Chicago.
So they added climate change provisions to their labor contract?
Yes, this is part of their negotiations, and it has not actually been approved yet. It still needs to be approved by the Chicago Board of Education. But there's a precedent for this. They're called common good demands, meant to benefit not only the members in the workplace, but the entire community. They had a 2019 contract in which they won several common good items like protections for immigrant students and teachers and affordable housing related measures. The new contract also guarantees academic freedom. So again, that's sort of considered a common good. And of course, academic freedom's becoming an issue lately in the US and other places. So yeah, like we like to talk about things like, using the courts to progress climate change. You can sue your utility, you can sue your local government for not doing enough on climate. Well, it turns out you can make that part of your labor negotiations as well. So it calls for other things like installing heat pumps and outfitting 30 schools with solar panels if they can get the funding. There is some funding possibilities for this sort of thing. They want an all-electric school bus fleet, and they want all newly constructed schools to be carbon free. And those last couple, the buses and the buildings, didn't end up in the final contract, but, they're setting the stage for another contract 4 years from now when hopefully those kinds of things will be on the table. So yeah, it hasn't been approved yet, but yeah, it absolutely makes sense if you want to do a good job.
It must be a powerful union, though. I'm thinking,
yeah,
I couldn't imagine any union that I know of putting those provisions in. Like you must have some bargaining power there.
Exactly, yeah. Large unions do have some bargaining power, and they are planning to use it.
So are they talking about upgrading schools with heat pumps?
It's both, though. They want heat pumps in the existing buildings as well.
So that's 25,000 member union, and they want climate educator positions. So that's impressive. Yeah. I think that's going to freak out some Republicans. I can see I've based on American politics, if they get wind of that, they'll start, can't have that. That's worse than DEI to them.
Yeah, well, we'll try and follow up whether or not this is approved or not. But
all right, I have some further understanding of China's dominance here of the clean energy world, and it comes from Thomas L. Friedman. He's one of the main New York Times opinion writers. Now, I followed him probably for 25 years on and off, especially, many years ago, he was the person saying, Germany's going solar and then China's following with. He was kind of one of the few voices around that would give, insight into what's actually going on in the world. And now, of course, we talk about this every week from many sources, but he has been making regular trips to China, and he's come back recently, and I think has a better understanding of what's going on. He wrote a column called "I Have Never Been More Afraid for My Country's Future." He wrote this back in April 15th of this year, 2025. So that link is there. You can find it on the New York Times as well. He's the New York Times Foreign Affairs, Globalization, and Technology columnist, and he was on the Ezra Klein show. Ever gotten into Ezra Klein at all? Listened to his podcasts or read his writing
No.
at all? But he's a popular guy too. He was talking about his recent trip to China. I'm going to play a couple clips here. This is the first one.
I asked you how your China trip was, and what you said to me basically was, Ezra, you have no idea how screwed we are.
What you see, Ezra, when you're there is the product of 30 years of being in the fitness gym. And it kind of works like this. New industry comes along, let's call it solar panels. Every major city in China decides they need a solar panel factory. And the local government subsidizes it, maybe domestically born, maybe partnership with a foreign one, maybe a foreign one. And you end up in a very short period of time, I'm making the number up, but with 75 solar panel companies. They then compete like crazy against each other in the fitness gym, and 5 of them survive. Those 5 are so fit that they can then go global at a price and level of innovation that is very hard for a foreign competitor to deal with, which is why China today basically controls the global solar panel market. But what you also don't see is that process of winnowing down from 100 of those solar panel companies to 5 produced a massive explosion of supply chains domestically to feed that industry. Same thing went on with cars. The same thing goes on with robots. And so where you end up 5 years later is with interlocking set of supply chains that now, if you're a young Chinese and say, I've just got this idea. I want to produce a shirt that has a pink polka dot button that can sing the Chinese national anthem backward. Someone will have it for you tomorrow.
Yeah, I thought this gives a really good explanation because in a way, China is like the ultimate free market. It's a fight, cage match, basically, of companies, because there's so many of them, because it has such a large population base and lots of innovation and universities and STEM grads that they just go at it until they're so good. But the government does sort of subsidize you at the beginning when you're not ready to get up and running. Whereas in the United States, you sort of have to have your crap together and, be all ready to go. And then you'll get funding or venture capital or government assistance and things like that sometimes. But in China, it's different. My problem is I don't see a system like that or anything like that or able to compete with that evolving here. So I think China is really going to dominate us in a lot of ways, if not always, eventually, because they're progressing. They're not, just catching up and staying there. They're keeping going. He said that only one congressional delegation from the United States went to China in the last 6 years. So they have no idea. I mean, we're just catching on ourselves on the show. You can hear it in real time as we're catching up. But the United States in general probably has no idea. And the government probably the people in government probably don't have any idea of what's going on. If they don't have any idea what's going on, there's no hope, right? They just assume that they're superior to everyone. Calling them peasants. J.D. Vance called them peasants. He also killed the Pope, by the way, which, I don't appreciate. He was the last person to see the Pope, Brian. It's suspicious. I think he made him angry and he had a heart attack. But since Trump won, there's been an aversion in Washington to say anything good about China. You're either a panda hugger is what they call you, or to go there. So President Xi made himself president for life. And the idea that openness would lead to a more open society is sort of faded now. So they're not really, thinking positive things about reaching out to China because they don't think it's going to do anything for a more open society there. China realized it could not compete with America with combustion vehicles, so they leapfrogged internal combustion vehicles for EVs. They just started with EVs and autonomous vehicles. By the way, there was a bad autonomous vehicle crash there with a Huawei car that encountered construction and killed 3 people, young people. So that was bad, and they're sort of having their moment with autonomous driving there now. And that's why we talked about signs on the highway now warning autonomous drivers to disengage your systems because construction was coming up. But phone companies, this is what Apple tried to do, and I thought it was kind of weird. Well, their phone companies are doing that, though. They're making cars, and they've done it, in really short order, like 2 or 3 years. They decided to make cars, and then they're making cars, and they're good. Like Huawei has the best car out there pretty much, especially with the ADAS system. Their advanced driving assistance system is better than everyone else's. Even though it killed 3 people, it's still better than everyone else's.
Yeah, well, Apple worked on that for many years and spent a couple of $1 billion sort of working on it in secret and then canceled the project. So Apple couldn't get it done.
I think there's going to be an interesting book on that one day. It might be an interesting story to hear because we don't know anything. So what tariffs by Trump are doing to American competitiveness? Well, I've got a big long clip of 2.5 minutes here, and I've never heard Thomas L. Friedman get angry, but he was angry. So we've got notes from listeners. People don't think that kids would listen to the show. We do have kids listening. We have at least 3 that I know of listening because their parents listen. They don't listen to every episode, but yeah, you might want to skip ahead 2.5 minutes after I stop talking. But I've decided to leave the bad language in because it's important, and he feels kind of like we feel some days. And yeah, it's just they're worrying about the wrong things and not dealing with China.
Hire clowns, expect a circus, okay? If that is your theory, go ahead, put all the tariffs 1,000% on China. That's day one. But these guys are entirely first-order thinkers. Day 2 has to be a strategy for what you do the morning after here. How do you then build the industrial base that you want to take advantage of the time you're buying with your tariffs? So what are these guys doing? Trump put up a wall, okay, against China, and then they went out and shot the American car companies. Ford was just downgraded today. I saw its stock, I think, is down to $7.50. Why is that? Because Ford did everything that Biden asked it to do, that irrational company would ask it to do, that we would want it to do. And then what does Donald Trump do? He comes in with his right-wing woke bullshit and says, we don't do EVs here. EVs are for girly men. We only do manly industries. Well, fuck that, okay? Because look what happens now to Ford. So you say, we want to bring this here. I don't want to have my kids screwing in parts, okay, into cars. I want them designing, okay, investing in and inventing the next generation of EVs. But let's go back to that ecosystem I talked about, Ezra. EVs, robots, autonomous cars, batteries, clean energy. If you say, oh, we're not to do the EV part, before I came over here, I read Trump wants to reopen coal plants, and he loves drill, baby, drill. Okay, so it doesn't make any sense. You're building a wall against China. Great, I'm all for it, but what are you doing behind the wall? So we catch up. You're taking your own companies out and shooting them in the back if they're not right-wing woke. What's the project, what the Trump administration focus on? How many billions can we take away from American universities of their research funds to punish them for DEI strategies? Now, I'm here not to advocate DEI, but if I had a limited time in the world right now, I sure wouldn't be focused on that. I'd be focused on doubling down on the research capacity of these universities. I'd be doubling down on NIH. What are they doing? They're cutting the budgets of our Crown Gem research facilities. So it's all just bullshit. They're not serious people. They're clowns.
Brian, he says what I'm thinking. Like, I don't know. Like, this China problem in competitiveness is a major problem for North America, for the Western world, because we're not going to be able to compete with this stuff. I think the election of Trump and his policies are probably the worst thing that could have happened to the American car industry. It's not like they're going to start making combustion vehicles because Trump says so, because EVs are dumb, even though his number two is, Elon Musk. It doesn't make any sense. So I don't understand how they're going to compete with this. And I think I kind of feel sorry for the American car companies. The couple of them at least are trying to make an EV push, and sometimes we question that here on the show, their genuineness, but they know what's going on. I mean, Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford, was driving one of these Chinese cars, one of the better ones, one of the better sports cars, for 6 months because he loved it so much and he wanted to know. He knows what's going on. So Friedman says basically it's a fitness gym, that China is a fitness gym, that you get in there and you get really fit, and only the strong survive, and then those ones have a supply chain already built up and down, and they go into the world and demolish you on price. And it's not just, people have this archaic notion of Chinese labor being cheap. Well, it's not. The cost of living there is cheap. If you can buy an apartment for $200 a month and things like that, but really, they're far more educated than we are, and we're even in Canada we see pressure against education, political pressure, because that creates in the minds of farther right people, that creates liberals. So it's just something I wanted to keep it. It's obviously an obsession of mine to wonder how China's working, but it's also because they are such a force in the clean energy world. Without them, we'd be kind of screwed on the whole temperature thing. I don't know. It's kind of a weird dichotomy where you're happy that they're doing it, but you're kind of worried about, certain groups being mistreated, or the, just buying communist stuff. But it's, without them, we'd be in trouble with the planet. Elon Musk advanced things greatly, and China took at that and ran with it. And now I don't know how Tesla's going to compete even, it's crazy. But it's more than cars. It's just all of our technology, right? And even catching up in AI. So we'll see. Time for some listener mail. Go ahead.
And of course, one of the goals of this, like one of the reasons you create tariffs, is to potentially create jobs in your own country. It's like, okay, well, we'll stop importing stuff and we'll start making it. But of course, that takes many years, and to try and match China's, ability in that would be kind of ridiculous. But the other thing that I heard this on the Morgan Housel podcast, which I quite enjoy. He's the guy who wrote The Psychology of Money. Even if you were able to do that and bring these construction jobs back to America, and I think that that's the idea behind a lot of these tariffs, is everyone's upset that, all these manufacturing jobs are not in America anymore. But the way automation has gone, even if you did bring them all back, a lot of the work would be done by robots anyway.
Yeah, by the time you built the factory, robots are going to be doing it. Friedman talked about dark factories. Do you know what that is? That's a factory that has no lights because there's no people, that there's just robots. They turn the lights on at 3 a.m. to check the maintenance, but they're all robots and that of course is very quickly, speeding up. I've got a story in the lightning round about robots doing utility work, like humanoid robots in China. We have no idea what's going on over there.
They turn the lights on once a day just to check for signs of a robot uprising, and then they turn the lights back off again. But yeah, he had a stat in this podcast. I can't remember exactly, but an example of like a car factory that, like, as recently as 1990 would have 30,000 employees. And now that same car factory has only 5,000 because so much is being automated and done by robots. So it's a bit of perhaps a lost cause to try and get those jobs back to America. All right, so now it's time to open up the mailbag. We got a letter here from John. John says, I finally signed up to support you on Patreon. Sorry it took so long.
Apology accepted.
My name is John Hayes. I grew up in the Swift Current area that's near where James and I live. After graduating from the U of R, class of 91, music ed, I moved to Japan. So John would have been at the U of R
when we were.
when you were there.
Yeah. I graduated in 92, and I took a music class at the old music building where he would have been probably.
Yeah. I finished up in 89, so not quite an overlap for me.
Good Lord.
Yeah. Well, I guess if he graduated in 91, then yes, we would have been there at the same time. All right. Moved to Japan. I'm now a Japanese citizen and live in Tsukuba, Ibaraki, about 60 kilometers northeast of Tokyo. Tsukuba, that might be close, is an interesting city that is the science hub of Japan. I can't throw a rock without hitting a PhD of some sort or other. We have 50 plus national institutes and at least another 100 private research labs studying everything. If you've seen a new tech coming out of Japan in material science, high energy physics, biotech, metrology, the science of measuring things, environment, etc., it was likely discovered in Tsukuba. All my drinking buddies are proper researchers. One of them held the record for most efficient solar panel for a few months. You'll be happy to hear he's now working in Toronto, helping to improve Canadian tech. Around 16 years ago, I got into local politics, serving 12 years on the Tsukuba City Council. 2 years ago, I leveled up and was elected to the Prefecture Council, similar to an MLA. And during my political career, I spent plenty of political capital pushing for increased solar energy and EVs. I think I've managed to get the city to put panels above their visitors' parking lot. It's a no-brainer. During the summer months, solar panel roofs not only keep the cars below cooler, they produce electricity. Why isn't everyone doing it? I'm hoping the installation will happen next year. Unfortunately, EVs still seem to be a bridge too far, but I'll keep working on the powers that be.
I'll continue reading. Personally, I've been driving a Nissan Leaf since 2014. I replaced my old one last year with a 60 kilowatt-hour Leaf E Plus model, getting a max of 400 kilometers on a full battery. What a difference. I also bought an electric power assistant bicycle a few years back. What a joy to ride. Your own experiences are near to my own, except we seldom get any snow. Japan claims to have 4 seasons. I only count 3. Well, lucky you. I wanted to let you both know how much I appreciate your podcasts. In this era of doom and gloom, you both are bringing me uplifting information that no one else in my circle seemed to be covering. As a supposed elder of the community, I am tasked with looking into the future and predicting what's to come. For years, I was so overwhelmed with all the darkness that climate change will bring. How does one plan for the apocalypse? A few years ago, someone introduced me to your show. Things have not become rosy, but at least I can see some hope. I also appreciate knowing what's coming down the pipe so I can let my colleagues know. As an aside, I was listening to your April 1st show and heard your report from one of the 2 Michaels. Interestingly, last year at a Canadian embassy event, I was introduced to the diplomat who helped the 2 Michaels get free from China imprisonment. They were 2 Canadians, business people that were detained by China because we detained the CEO of Huawei on behalf of the United States. He's also a grad of the U of R, where Brian and I went to school here in our own city, the University of Regina. Early 80s, I think. Probably would have crossed paths with him. Who knows? Keep up the good work. He says, for what it's worth, I would help to send James a heater for his Leaf. I would, but it's my understanding the part is cheap, but the installation is a big cost. Perhaps we'll have a chance to meet at some time in the future. I usually land in Regina when I go home to see my folks. It's so weird, Brian, to see people from this insignificant part of the world go off and do big things. And this is a live one, becoming basically the equivalent of a state senator or a state representative in Japan and a citizen. I in 92, I said this before, I was on the cusp of maybe going to Japan myself, and then the person who went before me a year or 2 earlier, she was from a small town in Saskatchewan, and she was very, very right-wing but she ended up fashion modeling there because she looked like a pale Japanese person because of her complexion and because of her hair color. And so she ended up, doing that. But instead of teaching English. But I didn't go at the last second because she said there was a recession taking place and things were bad in 92.
Yeah, well, that was a sort of a common thing for people of our generation, is that there weren't a lot of jobs for us here in Canada. So lots of people were going to Japan to teach English, or at least talking about it. And yeah, it was a common thing.
And shout out to the town of Swift Current, which we've mentioned a lot. I guess it's a small city on the show lately. Bob one of our listeners is from there or from the area. He's having problems with his EV. Hopefully that's resolved, Bob. We'll wait to hear from you. Contact us, Brian.
Yeah, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. You can leave a voicemail at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. And please join our Patreon page for free, or one of the paid tiers, and you'll get lots of content there on the Patreon page.
And thanks for that letter, John. We really appreciate you taking the time to give us a big thoughtful letter like that. It puts wind in our sails to hear from people like you, and we'll keep doing a good job and keep bringing you the positive news, because there's a lot of it.
Yeah, well, it's always a question, right? Of, every week we have to sit down and figure out what we talk about. And we do tend to talk about the positive stuff. The climate has already changed. So I kind of feel like that part is covered. Like that's a given. The climate has already changed. It's going to continue to change. But, it's mostly the good news stories that interest me, and I think are the ones worth talking about. This is a transition that is going to happen. It's probably going to happen later than it should. I mean, it's already later than it should, but, that's just the approach we seem to take.
And so much of it is unstoppable now because it's economics. Although Trump is doing his best, I noticed he's canceling wind projects that are already started and crazy things like that. But ultimately, worldwide, I think it's very unstoppable.
Yeah, no, the same thing happened in Ontario a few years ago when Doug Ford got elected. He canceled stuff that was already like half built. They had to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars in penalties.
It makes no sense whatsoever.
No sense. Yeah. All right, from Canary Media, free solar and batteries for low-income households in California. So we have heard about these kinds of programs before, and we probably talked about this program before, but there is a program in California for low-income households to get funding to put solar and batteries in their homes. But the problem is that you have to still pay for this up front, $30,000 to $40,000 often, to get this done. And then through this program, then you can get the money back, but this takes 3 or 4 months. So this company startup, Haven Energy, is planning to take on that debt themselves. And so the idea is they apply to the program and they put up the solar panels and the batteries, and then they're managing a virtual grid from this. So with all these houses that have batteries in it that they're installing, become part of a virtual grid. This is going to be around 10 megawatts. They're just starting to do this. But eventually, once it's built, that's a 10 megawatt virtual power plant that Haven Energy will control. And so the people who own the houses, they have to allow the battery to be used for the grid when needed, but they end up with, a lot of the savings on their power bill from, the reduced costs of having the solar.
Basically, the batteries charge up from the solar panels or even from the grid at night when there's low demand. And then the virtual power plant is when the utility has access to this power when they need it. It's all sort of remotely controlled. There's a little bit of battery in this house, a little bit of battery, but it all adds up to like a pretty significant 10 megawatts, which can be very helpful, which they can turn on all at the same time. Yeah. If it's a peak demand and they're running short, they don't have to fire up a natural gas generator or something like that or import it from out of state. They can just meet that, and they can do it quite instantly, within fractions of a second. And it all works together virtually, but it's has, most of these people, I'm thinking, Brian, probably wouldn't put a battery in their home if they're poor.
Because the batteries are still very expensive.
Yeah. And the benefit is battery backup during the power outage and so on.
they might be able to swing the solar panels if they're low income, or at least front the money for a few months. But to also do the battery, that's where you get to this maybe $30,000 or $40,000 cost, which, that's just going to be too much to float for a few months. But I've always we've heard of other solar companies doing similar things where they pay for the solar panels on your roof. And I think there's been some success with those because, just the simplicity of that, even if you don't make as much money from the solar, the fact that, someone else is handling the installation and everything, it always seemed like a good idea to me.
I think there was even an example in California one time where you could lease the solar panels and they would actually take it off your house if you didn't want them. But immediately, basically, all you got from it is a lower power bill. You didn't own the panels. You didn't get free electricity after 8, 10, 12 years. It just lowered your power bill. So there was, all you had to do is sign up and you have a lower power bill. You didn't have to do anything. But I think that might have fallen apart. I'm not sure. Maybe somebody can fill us in.
But yeah, this company, Haven Energy, they've run the numbers and they think that this is doable for them to put the cost up front. And, they take their piece of this, the homeowners get their piece of it. And seems like a good idea.
So, Brian, CATL has a new battery breakthrough already. We kind of knew something was coming because they were telling a YouTuber at an auto show, don't even pay attention to this battery because we have a much, much better one coming. So we knew something was coming. And it's been about a month since BYD had their big breakthrough, which charged a battery, I think, in 5 minutes for 400 kilometers.
Yeah, that was the last big breakthrough we talked about, which, BYD, and it was only about a month ago.
Well, this new generation of battery that CATL has, and by the way, CATL is the world's biggest battery maker. BYD is a car company, but they're also the second largest battery maker. They started as a battery maker for cell phones and such back in the late 90s. So they're the biggest one now, and apparently they had to outdo BYD because they have something that charges even faster. So yes, the world's leading supplier of electric vehicle batteries announced on Monday it has developed new technology to produce batteries that are cheaper, lighter, charge faster, perform better in cold conditions, yay for that, Canadian speaking here, and offer longer driving range. While these improvements are still a few years from widespread adoption, they're not far from actually being implemented. They'll be implemented at the end of this calendar year in some vehicles. And they'll make it, potentially electric cars more price and performance competitive with their gasoline counterparts. Because batteries, as we know, are very expensive. They cost about a third of the cost of an EV. And there's a lot of technology in EVs, a lot of technology in cars in general these days, but a third of it is the battery. Auxiliary battery is something that they've also come up with. This is a weird concept. It means that part of the battery is separate from the other part of the battery. And it has a different chemistry. It has no graphite in it. You know that graphite often comes from the Congo, and it's kind of controversial because there's children who are hired to mine that. Yeah, but this will make it cheaper because the graphite is one of the more expensive critical minerals and things. And they have an energy density that is 60% more by volume, which is crazy. We talk about incremental improvements for batteries and how it's a steady march, but this is a huge leap. Yeah, so this second battery, basically it's not going to be used because the problem when you take the cobalt or the graphite, out of the battery is that it charges slower. So you can't really have this as part of the main battery, but you can have it, say, in reserve for long trips. You can have that battery just sitting there for long trips. So this is a different sort of strategy. So graphite only removed in the auxiliary batteries because it charges slow and it would be used for long drives, but it can also has a big weakness where it can't be charged as much as the ones with normal batteries. So we talk about 1,000 charging cycles for batteries, which means 20 years of ownership, really. It's not like you charge it 20 times. It's from 0 to full, and then it starts to degrade, but it's still useful.
Yeah, so like in my electric car, the recommended daily charging is to 80%. That's what Tesla recommends is you charge it to 80% for sort of daily driving, and then only when you're on a road trip do you charge it to 100. So it sounds like it's a similar kind of thing where you would only engage this other part.
The 20% is a totally different battery with different chemistry and, would charge fine at home, but not so much on the road. So here's the big development here. The main batteries are going to charge in 5 minutes and give you 520 kilometers of range or 320 miles. That is compared to 400 from our last announcement from BYD a month ago. So 5 minutes of charging truly would give you a lot of driving, an awful lot of driving. But, that's going to require 1.3 megawatts of charging power, which is crazy. And the other one was 1 megawatt. So,
and we don't have those kind of chargers yet.
No. So that's another issue. So this is 12C charging. The 12C means that it can charge from 0 to full, or not 0 to full, but typical charge 12 times in an hour, which is 10 to 80% usually. Because you don't go below 10% when you're driving and you don't go above 80 because it's slow after that. So that's a 5 minute in theory. And the range of these batteries is over 800 kilometers, which I argue is excessive for most applications because you have a bladder. You have to stop and get a snack and go to the washroom. And it's pretty easy to do. An electric car, you just plug in and walk away and it charges you. It bills your account based on your car. So CATL also said it would sell sodium-ion batteries to replace the the small lead-acid batteries in ICE vehicles, the ones that start and turn the crank of the car and then also run your radio and everything. They think that sodium-ion batteries, which they brought to commercialization, I think in 21, would be a good application for these kinds of batteries too, because they basically work at minus 40 without losing energy. So unlike a lead-acid battery, which kind of gets when you're trying to start your car, these would have really good properties. And I'm assuming they'll be expensive at first, but they'll probably make their way. It's called the Naxtra, and it's ready for commercialization now. Almost all of the world's naturally occurring geological deposits of soda ash, the raw material for sodium-ion batteries, are in, get this, southwestern Wyoming.
Wow.
It's not just any sodium, it's sodium ash or soda. Yeah, kind of, it's a weird kind of sodium, and it's all in Wyoming. So, hey, Wyoming, I know you don't like clean energy that much, but that's very interesting. You might be sitting on a gold mine there, so to speak. The next generation sodium-ion batteries will be sold starting this year, and CATL was the first to bring them in 2021. They're saying 90% of energy in minus 40. If you let your car battery sit to minus 40, it won't work. It won't work below minus 20 Celsius. So the heaters in the car will heat the batteries to keep them up to at least minus 20 so they're operational. Well, in theory, if you had no heater, and this adds to your electricity costs if you live in a very cold climate. Of course, most people don't, but we do. You could just let it sit there, minus 40, it'll still be 90%. This is insane.
It's crazy.
And I don't know how long, it's going to be a long time before that trickles here because most people don't live in such a horrible place that we do. Like it's snowing today.
It snowed today.
It's so wrong. They're trying to kill us. The nature is trying to kill us. So CATL founder Robin Zeng took to the stage at the end of the event to remind people that CATL has never defined itself as a battery manufacturer, but a pioneer of clean energy systems. And Clean Technica, the clean tech blog, offered this analysis. What matters is the constant bleating of anti-EV folks about how they won't buy an electric car unless they can charge it in the same time it takes to fill a gas tank in a combustion vehicle is now so much hot air. A while ago, they said they wouldn't buy an EV if it didn't offer at least 300 miles of range, and that barrier has been broken, shattered, so now the Chicken Littles will need to invent a new reason to disdain electric cars. And I agree, Brian. I think that we don't need to charge a car in 5 minutes. my use scenario, my real world scenario says that 12 would be fine,
Yep.
and it's cheaper, and you don't have to have such heavy infrastructure. But as long as people out there know that you can charge it in 5 minutes, it shuts them up. Shuts them up immediately.
Yeah, and of course, my recent road trips have been super short charging times. And I also don't want to drive 10 hours in a day anymore. So that tends to make things simpler as well. So yeah, no reason not to buy an EV if you can charge it in 5 minutes. Now, hopefully people won't wait until these are on the market to buy an EV because it's still very good now with the charging that you can get now. All right, another one from Canary Media, Manhattan's first housing co-op to electrify heating and cooling. So co-op apartment buildings are quite common in New York City. The board decided in 2023 to swap out the structure's original fossil fuel steam system for large-scale electric heat pumps that provide space heating, cooling, and water heating. The utility and state incentives covered a third of the $2.9 million cost, which doesn't seem so bad for a large apartment building. So this puts the co-op well ahead of the curve in complying with the local law 97, the city's landmark legislation limiting CO2 emissions from buildings larger than 25,000 square feet. Owners of buildings that overshoot these carbon thresholds face financial penalties. And we've talked about that law before. It's a really innovative law that New York is doing. They know that a lot of the emissions in New York come from buildings, less so because of the density of the population in New York. They don't get as many of their emissions from things like car travel. So if you're going to tackle it, you got to start with buildings. So the law's first reporting deadline is this May 1st, and the 110-unit co-op has hit its emissions reduction targets far ahead of schedule. With the upgrades completed last September, it'll avoid triggering penalties through 2049. So these are yearly penalties that people are going to have to contend with if they don't switch. And, so they've taken matters into their own hands and gotten to it. And we've talked about other such building projects in New York. So I thought this one was interesting. So this is 420 Beekman Hill, and it's switching to all electric for heating, cooling, and water heating. The co-op had originally relied on the local utility Con Edison's direct steam system, which is primarily fed by fossil gas and some fuel oil. And we've talked about this before. Some parts of New York have what's essentially a district heating system where the utility supplies not just electrical and gas, but steam through several sort of interconnected buildings and interconnected pipes. And in the summer, these heat pumps are going to work in reverse, drawing heat from inside the apartments and dumping it outside. And this also allowed them to ditch their absorption chillers, which ran on the same steam system. And this was news to me. I didn't realize that this was a possibility, but you can essentially use the same steam system in the summer for cooling. It's just instead of using electricity you're using heat to create the cooling, if that makes any sense. If someone could explain to me more about...
I had to read about this. It says it uses the collection of waste heat from other processes or equipment to drive a thermodynamic process that allows water to be chilled and distributed for HVAC needs in place of conventional refrigerants. Water is usually mixed with either ammonia or lithium bromide, and lithium bromide is the more common one because it's not toxic. We have a lot of engineers listening to this show. I'm going to have to get up to speed on that one because we don't have that around here, and I've never heard of it before, and it sounds wacky to me. It sounds... No,
and if someone out there understands how this works, please write us a letter. But absorption chillers, which ran their cooling in the summertime. So I just thought that was super interesting. And I think one of the challenges is going to be, there's going to be so many buildings in New York that are going to need to make these changes. Just having enough people and companies and workers to do all this work, to switch all these buildings over, that's going to be tough. So smart to get on it now.
It's time for the Lightning Round.
The Lightning Round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
Oh, look, EVs are holding up better than combustion cars, says ADAC. In 2024, ICE cars aged 2 to 4 years were 2.5 times more likely to break down than EVs. EVs on the road are up 97%. EV breakdowns only 46% up. New York adds $30 million more to its EV rebate pot. It's only a $2,000 rebate, but it's also a federal one available to you guys in New York. That's as long as it's more than a 200-mile range. I think they have a smaller one for less than 200-mile range EVs. From Clean Technica, the first time U.S. electricity is generated by less than 50% fossil fuels. The March numbers had renewables and, clean energy, which includes nuclear, surpassing fossil fuels for the first time. And that's a landmark, sort of a benchmark, not a landmark, but a benchmark.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
And that's, of course, going to continue to rise. Wind and solar were about 25% of that. Over in California, for the year 2024, solar itself almost overtook natural gas generation. This year, it will likely take the lead. You can read about that in Canary Media. This is a CES Fast Fact. Only 5% of U.S. multifamily housing offers on-site EV charging. That'd be nice if that would get better, Brian.
Yeah, it's still a challenge if you live in an apartment to charge an EV.
And another CES Fast Fact. A single year of greenhouse gas emissions from tankers carrying LNG from the United States, just tankers that carry LNG, and just for the United States, more than cancels out the annual reductions achieved through driving all electric vehicles on U.S. roads. That's going to change, though. China's coal generation dropped 5% year on year in Q1, the first quarter of this year. That's good because they still build coal plants there, though they're stopping in 27, like basically all the ones that are in construction, and that's it. And also, they're not using them as much. They're paying the companies to just sit around and have it as backup. So even as the overall electricity demand in China is increased in this communist nation, that has gone down. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, says emerging economies are set to make up 85% of the additional growth in power demand up to 2027 due to economic growth in those regions, which is good, and higher air conditioning use. That is something we've been talking about a lot. You get into the middle class, you buy an air conditioner, especially if you live in a hot climate, which most people do. And advanced economies are on track to see consumption climb after a 15-year plateau, thanks to first fluorescent bulbs and LED bulbs and other energy-efficient appliances and things. But that's going to change now due to data centers. And I mentioned this earlier. China's Yunnan grid has started using humanoid robots to install and repair power grid infrastructure. It was used to install a 220 kilovolt substation. And yes, we're looking at a picture of a humanoid robot doing lineman work, dangerous work. And I guess if they find the robot, they just throw it out and get another one.
Yeah, I guess it would still have to take, precautions against getting electrocuted because it would ruin the robot, but it's better to have a robot ruined than a human.
Well, they're going to get self-aware one day, Brian, and they're not going to want to do these jobs. I'm not doing that. I'm a sentient being. On the Run, the Parkland Corps flagship convenience store brand, which I used last time I went to BC in my EV, I guess it's been a couple summers ago, they were just starting up and they were offering free charging and a 20% discount in their delicious burger shop inside the store. If you've charged for free, if you were bold enough to do that, they would also give you a 20% off your meal, which I thought was like the best thing ever. It doesn't get better than that. My family still remembers that. They have announced the opening of their first 400 kilowatt DC fast charger in Western Canada. So we don't see the stuff that they're starting to build in China. We peak out around 350 here, and most of those are broke. They're at the Petro-Canada network or Electrify Canada network. The construction of Tesla's largest supercharger station is a massive 168 stall site in Lost Hills, California, and is well underway. And I see a solar farm nearby. That's something that Musk used to promise about his charging. So we'll build solar farms with it, and it'll reduce the price of charging and the environmental impact of charging as well. But that really never took off.
Parking lot solar canopies on this in the picture as well. So what John was talking about from Japan, it's a no-brainer. You should always be putting solar panels up as canopies in charging stations. Always a good idea.
Yeah, it protects you from the rain, just like, you have to get out and plug it in. There was only 1 or 2 instances where I had to do that, but like it's like a gas station. You want to be able to get out and do something without getting hailed on or something. And yeah, it doesn't cover all the power of the station, but at least it does some, and you might as well use the rooftop space you have. Globally, data centers are sent to make up less than 10% of electricity demand growth to 2030, but some regions are more affected by these data centers. So that could mean 50% of demand growth. The demand that grows the United States up to 2030, half of that could be because of data centers. Same for Japan. See, we got Japan news this week. We don't always have Japan news. There's some Japan news for you. And then also 20% in Malaysia. So zero emissions electricity is now at 41% of world electricity. So there's a good news story for you.
Yeah.
That's last year, 2024, came in at 41%. Not bad, not where it quite needs to be, but we're getting there. Japan, another Japan story, remained the world's 4th largest solar generating country in 2024. Does that surprise you? Because it surprised me.
Yeah, because it's not a huge country. You don't think of them as having a lot of extra space for things like solar panels.
So high density populations and not places, you don't have suburbs where you're putting rooftop solar on places. But yeah, it's the 4th largest generating country in last year. And solar share was rising by 5 times from 2% in 2014 to 10% of the grid in 2024. But wind share was only 1%, significantly behind the 12% average for the rest of the G7. But Japan is starting to get into wind.
Yeah, so presumably they've decided that solar is the better bet for them, but, we'll see.
Brian, is this a coincidence that we get a letter from Japan? I have yet another Japan story. Wow. Waymo robotaxis are moving forward in Japan with partners. And they're partnering with a taxi company, Nihon Katsu, and taxi platform Go. They're nudging forward and getting ready for a launch in Japan, which is interesting.
Yeah, first time hearing of that.
That's the American part of Google that does self-driving taxis. And I saw a YouTuber, they were trying to test out a self-driving car in China. I'm not sure what city, but they said they couldn't get it. It kept getting canceled. And they asked around and they said, yeah, the cab drivers are all booking false trips to sabotage the self-driving car company because they're mad. So I don't know how long that's going to last or what sort of workaround we'll have for that. And finally this week, Pope Francis had become one of the most influential voices on the moral side of climate change. Back in 2015, he released a encyclical called, Laudato Si, where he framed environmental issues not just as scientific or political problems, but as deep moral and spiritual ones. I always admired him for that, and of course he passed away this past Monday. He emphasized that climate change affects everyone, but especially the poor and vulnerable who contribute the least to the problem, yet suffer the most from its effects. Francis argued that caring for the earth is a responsibility we all share, tied to justice, human dignity, and the common good. He's been openly critical of systems that prioritize profit over people and the planet, and he's urged world leaders to take bold action, especially at the international climate summits. He rode in an electric Pokemobile, which we've covered on the show. I think he had an electric Leaf at one point back in the day that was gifted to him. I don't know how much use they made out of it. It was a fully electric Mercedes-Benz G-Class, which was gifted to him a few months ago, I guess at the end of last year. But if you're driving through crowds, waving and shaking and kissing babies, blessing people, you don't want emissions from your vehicle. You want a nice electric vehicle. And that makes the first all-electric Popemobile and part of a larger initiative to transition the Vatican's fleet. It is a country, Brian. Sometimes it's easy to forget, but the Vatican is its own country. It's going to transition the fleet of Vatican vehicles to emissions-free by 2030. I hope the new Pope does that. In 2023, the Pope Francis followed up with another document called Laudate Deum, where he warned that time is running out and called for urgent efforts to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Fighting climate change was a moral obligation and part of a deeper shift in how we relate to nature, to each other, and to the future generations. And gosh, I wish the Christian believers in the United States felt the same way, but they don't. And they are often sabotaging efforts for climate progress there.
All right. Well, that's it for the show this week. You can contact us at cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. On social media, we're Clean Energy Pod. And you can join our Patreon community to get our bonus podcasts and more. And remember to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast.
Thank you so much to all of our Patreon members who are, some of them are the Clean Club executive members. They get a shout out, Green Bastard and Brent Rowley. Join our Patreon today as a paying member and get access to our exclusive Patreon episodes, including ad-free episodes, early episodes, the Discord server, discounts at our merch store, behind-the-scenes material, thank you credits on the video podcast, and shout-outs on the audio podcast from time to time. And Brian, we'll see you again in 7 days. We'll leave you this week, I think, with the national anthem from Japan.
All right. See you next week.